He smirked at her from behind a podium, chalk in hand. You people clean buildings. You don't solve math. But what Professor Morrow didn't know was that the black girl he humiliated in front of his class had just cracked a proof that would flip the academic world on its head. 3 years later, she's headlining global math conferences, and he's the subject of a federal investigation. So how did the janitor's daughter become the one rewriting every rule they tried to silence her with? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The halls of Hawthorne University carried a strange kind of quiet at night, one that didn't whisper peace, but hierarchy. Footsteps echoed louder after hours, as if the building wanted to remind those who didn't belong that they were trespassing. For 14-year-old Zariah Blake, those late evenings weren't explorations, they were routine. Her mother, Janice, worked the night shift as a janitor. Zariah often came along, partly because they couldn't afford childcare, and partly because Janice feared leaving her daughter alone in their 2-bedroom unit, where the neighbors argued through walls and sirens replaced lullabies. Janice pushed her cart of cleaning supplies with silent dignity, her back straight, her footsteps measured, her uniform was always pressed, her name tag gleaming as if the job demanded reverence. And Zariah, usually quiet as a shadow, followed closely, a worn backpack hanging off her shoulder. Some nights she'd bring her homework, other nights a sketchpad. But what she loved most was lingering near the math department, its whiteboards full of half-finished thoughts and ghostly symbols that floated like riddles. She didn't know why it called to her. Maybe it was the elegance of patterns, or the way equations hinted at secrets. She'd sit quietly in the back of a lecture hall, unseen, watching chalk dance under fluorescent light as ideas bloomed. The math building smelled of markers and carpet glue, but Zariah associated them with something else: brilliance, belonging. It was during one of those nights that she wandered into room 2B, the main lecture hall. The room was empty, save for a single professor at the front, scribbling furiously on the board. His gray blazer was flung over a chair, sleeves rolled up, elbow deep in theory. Professor Declan Morrow. The name was on the door. The plaque glinted like a warning. He was a man whose academic reputation was matched only by his condescension. He had a legacy in abstract algebra, and a loyal following of PhD students. But none of that mattered to Zariah. What she saw was someone doing magic, and for a moment, she forgot herself. She took a step closer, eyes wide, reading his variables aloud softly. If a ring R has identity, and every non-zero element is a unit, then R is a field. Morrow turned sharply. He didn't speak at first. His eyes landed on her skin, then her hoodie, then the janitor cart outside. "You're not supposed to be here," he said flatly. Zariah flinched. I'm with my mom. She's cleaning the..." He cut her off. "This is a research wing, not daycare." She looked down at her sneakers, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, I just like math. I thought I could." "You thought wrong," he replied, a scoff curling from his lips. Then he walked over, slowly, as if proximity might make his authority clearer. "Math isn't about liking it, it's about mastering it. And some minds just aren't built for it." Zariah blinked. He wasn't yelling. That would have been easier to process. Instead, he spoke with calm certainty, the kind that couldn't be argued with, only absorbed, like an equation already solved. "I've seen your type," he added. "Curious until it gets hard, then it's everyone else's fault." She didn't understand what her type meant at first, but then she did. The words hit her chest before her brain. She stepped back, nodded stiffly, and mumbled another apology. As she turned to leave, he muttered loud enough for her to hear, "Stick to what you know." Zariah walked out, her head low, her ears burning. Janice saw the tears in her daughter's eyes a few minutes later, as she emptied a trash bin. She asked nothing. Zariah said nothing. The hallway buzzed with vending machines and fluorescent lights, indifferent to a teenage girl's silent shame. Later that night, while helping her mom bag recyclables in the faculty lounge, Zariah noticed a pile of discarded textbooks. Old editions, pages yellowed, bindings loose. One of them had a note stuck inside. Outdated. Trash. She hesitated. Then, as Janice mopped the far end of the hall, Zariah reached into the pile and pulled one out. Foundations of Advanced Algebra. Heavy. Intimidating. Beautiful. She didn't ask. She didn't need permission. She slipped it into her backpack, zipped it tight, and said nothing as they left. Back at home, In a room dimly lit by a thrift store lamp, Zariah opened the textbook. The pages smelled like ink and insulation. The symbols stared back at her, uncaring, but inviting. She traced them with her finger like braille, searching not just for understanding, but for redemption. That night, while the rest of the city slept, Zariah began teaching herself math. A single page falls out from the back of the book, scribbled in faded red ink, is a problem even Google can't solve. And Zariah, without knowing why, decides she will. The pages of Foundations of Advanced Algebra had become Zariah's new world, an escape, a rebellion, and a prayer all at once. The textbook was too advanced for a freshman in high school, yet it spoke to her in a rhythm that made sense. Symbols didn't care about skin color, and numbers didn't whisper prejudice. In her small bedroom, where paint peeled from the walls and the hum of an old refrigerator echoed through the night, Zariah built her kingdom, one equation at a time. The room was her sanctuary. Her desk, a repurposed kitchen table, was crowded with notebooks, graph paper, and the flicker of a half-melted candle. She worked late into the night, the glow from her mother's phone hotspot casting dim blue light across pages filled with impossible theorems. When her eyes grew tired, she'd whisper the formulas to herself like lullabies. Her mother would peek in, sometimes after a long shift, exhausted but proud.
"You're gonna burn yourself out, baby," Janice would say softly, rubbing her aching wrists.
Zariah would smile faintly. "Mama, I just want to finish this one proof. It's almost making sense." Janice would chuckle, half in admiration, half in fear. "You're too much like your daddy, always thinking too big before breakfast." But there was pride behind the teasing. It was the kind that came from knowing your child might one day rise above the ceilings you've scrubbed clean. By day, Zariah lived another life, a quiet, misunderstood one. At Eastwood High, she was invisible until she wasn't. When she raised her hand in math class, the teacher's eyes often flicked past her. When she answered correctly, a few students rolled theirs, and when she scored higher than anyone else, whispers followed her through the halls. She must have copied. She probably Googled the answers. "You really think she's that smart?" Each word felt like a push downward, but Zariah learned to turn silence into armor. Her math teacher, Mr. Corbin, a middle-aged man with a clipped mustache and perpetual disinterest, often looked inconvenienced by her brilliance. Once he caught her writing something complex in her notebook during free period. "You know this isn't college, right?" he said with a smirk. "That's not in our curriculum." "It's just something I'm trying to figure out," she replied softly, her pencil still moving. "Well, maybe focus on the work you're actually supposed to do," he added, walking away. Zariah looked back at her notebook, where she had almost derived a clean expression for a function she'd been struggling with all week. She erased it out of frustration, but deep down she knew she was closer than anyone else could see. At lunch, she sat alone, balancing her tray and notebook on the same small table. Her classmates talked about prom themes and basketball games. Zariah talked to herself in equations. It wasn't loneliness. It was devotion. Each night, the city outside her window pulsed with sirens and arguments, but in her room, she created silence. Candlelight flickered against the walls as numbers danced in her mind. She didn't just understand the equations. She felt them, like music. When she found balance between both sides of an equation, her heart would swell with the same satisfaction, as if she'd written a poem only the universe could read. Her notebook became filled with her own symbols and shortcuts, a language only she could understand. She didn't notice it happening, but her thoughts began to move faster than her pen could keep up with. When a problem refused to yield, she wouldn't quit. She'd step away, think, return, and wrestle with it, until it surrendered. Sometimes her mother would wake up in the middle of the night to find her asleep at her desk, cheek pressed to a page full of proofs. Janice would smile faintly, drape a blanket over her shoulders, and whisper, "Dream big, my baby." One Saturday afternoon, Zariah was called into detention. The reason? Disrespectful behavior. The truth, she had corrected her teacher's mistake in class, a minor one, but one that embarrassed him. When she tried to explain, he told her to stop showing off. The detention room was half empty. She sat near the back, flipping open her notebook. On the page was a strange theorem she'd found at the end of that old university book. Something about non-commutative algebraic systems. It fascinated her. The problem wasn't just difficult, it was unsolved. As she worked through the symbols, her mind slipped into rhythm. The walls disappeared. The ticking clock faded. Every thought she had, Every injustice, every dismissal, every insult, transformed into clarity. She found patterns that weren't visible at first, shapes forming from what seemed like chaos. The equations began to align, step by step, until her pencil stopped. Her hand trembled. She didn't know if what she'd written was correct, but it felt right, like a chord resolving after endless tension. When the detention bell rang, she didn't move. She just stared at the page. Later, as she walked home, the city's noise came back. Cars honked, voices argued, life moved. But Zariah was elsewhere, mentally rewinding her process, checking every line in her mind. By the time she reached her apartment, she ran straight to her room, opened the book again, and started cross-referencing. For 2 nights she didn't sleep properly. Her candle melted to nothing. Her eyes burned. She used her mother's old phone to search for any similar work. Nothing matched. The realization didn't excite her. It frightened her. Could she have stumbled upon something new? At school on Monday, she barely spoke. Her notebook stayed under her arm like a secret. In math class, Mr. Corbin was absent, replaced by a substitute teacher, a young woman with auburn hair, thick glasses, and an alert curiosity. Her name was Ms. Conway. "All right, class," she began cheerfully. "I'm just here for the week, but let's make it a good one." Zariah didn't expect anything different. But during the second half of class, as the others chatted, she quietly opened her notebook again. She began adding a few lines to the proof she'd started in detention. Miss Conway walked by, glancing at each student's work. When she stopped at Zariah's desk, she froze. Her eyes scanned the page once, twice. Then she leaned closer, whispering, "Where did you get this?" Zariah looked up nervously. "It's mine. I was just trying to figure it out." The substitute didn't speak for a moment. Her expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief. "Do you know what this is?" Zariah shook her head. "It's from an old college book my mom found. I was just playing with it." Miss Conway straightened, her pulse quickening. She knew the notation. She knew the concept. It was a line of inquiry most undergraduates couldn't grasp, let alone a high school freshman. Her voice dropped to a whisper again. "You need to hold on to this, Zariah. Don't show anyone else. Not yet." Zariah blinked, confused but obedient. "What?" The substitute gave her a look that mixed awe with urgency. Because this might not just be homework. It might be original. The bell rang, snapping the moment apart. Students shuffled out, unaware of the quiet discovery unfolding in their classroom. Zariah gathered her things, her heart pounding, not knowing what it meant, but knowing her life had just shifted. As she stepped into the hallway, Miss Conway stayed behind, staring at the open notebook left momentarily on the desk. Her eyes landed on the final line of the proof, and a shiver ran through her. It wasn't just correct. It was revolutionary. Miss Conway clutched the notebook to her chest, whispering to herself, "This can't be real," as the door opened, and Professor Declan Morrow stepped inside. Miss Conway barely slept that night. Zariah's notebook sat open across her kitchen table, its pages humming with raw, untouched brilliance. The young woman's coffee had gone cold, untouched for hours, as she examined and re-examined the scribbled lines. They weren't just mathematically correct. They were beautifully constructed. The logic was coherent, inventive, and somehow intuitive in ways most doctoral candidates never mastered. She took photos, encrypted them, and uploaded them to her academic drive with a timestamp. Not out of paranoia, but protection. Ideas like this, from someone like Zariah, were vulnerable. Conway had seen it before, how black brilliance, especially when it arrived without pedigree or permission, was questioned, diluted, or quietly erased. By morning she made a choice. She called her advisor. Dr. Eli Sandberg was a leading authority in non-commutative algebra, and a legend at Braxton University. He rarely picked up calls before noon, but when he heard the words original theorem and 14-year-old high school student, his tone changed. "Send it," he said. Within hours, her email reply came back, brief but loaded with urgency. "This is not undergrad work. Where did she see this published?" "She didn't," Conway replied. "She derived it herself." A pause followed. "Then I need to speak with this girl." But before that could happen, the whispers began. By that evening, a small group of postdocs at Braxton were buzzing in private Slack channels. Screenshots of Zariah's proof circulated quietly among mathematicians from MIT to Stanford, The name Z. Blake was mentioned with a mix of skepticism and astonishment. Could someone that young truly create something so structurally sound? Something new. And still, Zariah knew none of it. At Eastwood High, she went about her Tuesday like any other. She sharpened her pencils in silence. She took notes on lessons she'd already mastered weeks ago. She ate lunch alone. But the quiet shifted when Ms. Conway entered her fourth period class, holding a manila folder close to her chest. "Zariah," she said, "can I speak with you for a minute?" In the hallway, Zariah's heart drummed against her ribs. Had she done something wrong? But Miss Conway's voice was calm, gentle even. "I sent your work to someone I trust, a professor at my university. He's stunned. Zariah. He wants to meet you." Zariah blinked. "Why?" "Because you've done something important, and because people need to see it." The words didn't feel real, but it was just for fun, Zariah said softly. Mrs. Conway knelt slightly, matching her height. "No, that wasn't fun, Zariah. That was genius." For the first time, Zariah felt the possibility of her own potential hit her chest like sunlight. But with it came a chill. Something old. The voice of Morrow still echoing. Some minds just aren't built for it. That voice would return sooner than she expected. At Hawthorne University, Professor Declan Morrow was sipping coffee in the faculty lounge when a younger colleague approached. "Did you see the chatter in the forum?" he asked casually. A high schooler cracked the Aurelian loop problem. "They're calling it the Blake Theorem." Morrow scoffed, but the name froze him. "Blake?" The colleague nodded. "Apparently submitted through Sandberg's team at Braxton." Morrow leaned back slowly. "Let me guess, young ambitious comes from nothing." The man laughed. "I think so. A high school freshman, if you can believe it." Morrow's expression darkened. He remembered her. The janitor's daughter with eyes too bold for her station. He said nothing. But inside, panic simmered. Later that day, he attended a faculty meeting. As names and initiatives were tossed around the room, Morrow cleared his throat. "I'd be cautious about celebrating unvetted work," he said calmly. "There's chatter about a proof by someone named Blake. But from what I gather, it wasn't properly peer-reviewed. We should be wary of self-plagiarized content, especially in an era where AI does most of the thinking." The room went quiet. No one challenged him. Why would they? Morrow had tenure, reputation, and a tongue sharp enough to make skepticism sound like wisdom. But behind his eyes, fear had begun to bloom. If the janitor's daughter was capable of that, then everything he believed about brilliance, about who deserved to be here, was collapsing. Back at Eastwood, things moved quickly. Zariah received a typed letter handed to her by the assistant principal. It was on ivory paper with a gold crest. "The National Youth Academic Symposium cordially invites Zariah Blake to present her original mathematical work before a panel of scholars and students from across the country." Her hands trembled. She walked it home that day, pressing it against her chest under her coat, like it might be stolen if seen. When she showed it to her mother, Janice dropped the dish in her hand. It shattered across the kitchen tile. "You're gonna be on a stage?" Janice whispered. Zariah nodded. "And saying your own math." Another nod. Janice clutched her daughter, tears spilling freely. "Baby girl, what did I tell you? What did I tell you? Ain't no ceiling God can't break." But the celebration was short-lived. That night, Miss Conway called with a tight tone. "Zariah, I just received the final symposium lineup. There's a panel of judges reviewing each student presentation." Zariah smiled, unaware. "Cool. Who's on it?" Miss Conway hesitated. "Professor Declan Morrow. From Hawthorne." The line went silent. Zariah's fingers slowly tightened around the receiver. The warmth she'd felt just hours ago drained out. "I'm so sorry," Miss Conway added. "I had no idea he'd be on it. But listen to me, you've earned this. Don't let him shake you." Zariah said nothing. She stood in her bedroom, the same one where candlelight once danced over paper. But tonight her sanctuary felt invaded, like the ghosts she'd tried to outrun were sitting in the audience, waiting to laugh again. That night she didn't sleep. She didn't study. She stared at her theorem, the one Morrow would now scrutinize. Then she did something she hadn't done before. She wrote a new problem, one he'd never seen. In the final symposium email, a last-minute change is announced. Zariah Blake has been moved to the closing keynote slot, right after Morrow's speech. The day of the symposium dawned overcast. The sky a heavy flat gray, as though the weather itself knew a storm was coming. Zariah stood in the mirror, adjusting the navy blue blazer Janice had borrowed from her coworker. It was slightly too big but clean, ironed, and dignified. Her hair was neatly braided into a low bun. She wore no jewelry, no makeup, just resolve. Janice waited by the door, holding her phone like a badge. "You're gonna go in there and remind them that genius don't come with a name tag, baby." Zariah nodded, swallowing her fear. "I know." They took the bus together to the downtown auditorium, where the National Youth Academic Symposium was being held. Outside, cameras flashed and students in blazers and pressed skirts posed for photos, their families clapping. Janice stayed back, clutching her daughter's backpack with both hands, watching Zariah disappear into the registration area, like a soldier walking into a war zone. Inside, the air smelled of cologne and ambition. Banners hung from the ceiling. Tomorrow's thinkers. Today. Zariah held her printed ID badge and found her way backstage, where student presenters reviewed notes and clutched laptops like life rafts. She noticed quickly, none of them looked like her. And then she saw him, Professor Morrow. He stood at the side of the main stage, speaking to two event coordinators, his back straight, his voice low but commanding. Even here, he carried authority like it was tailored into his suit. His eyes met hers for only a second, then moved on, as if she were background noise. Zariah took a deep breath and walked toward the tech table, where she was instructed to upload her slides. A student volunteer helped her connect her USB. "Everything should be preloaded," the tech said. "Double-check your deck?" Zariah nodded and clicked through her PowerPoint. The formatting looked off. Some of her symbols were skewed, the animations she'd practiced gone. "I formatted this yesterday," she whispered. The tech frowned. "Maybe there was a conversion glitch. Let me check the server copy." But the copy was the same. Symbols misaligned, graphs unresponsive. From across the room, Morrow watched, his lips barely curved. A few minutes later, her name was called over the loudspeaker. Not for her keynote yet. A brief pre-symposium panel, they said, hosted by Professor Morrow. Zariah walked on stage into the blinding spotlight. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation. She took her seat among 3 other students, 2 boys in private school uniforms, and a girl from a magnet school in Chicago. Morrow moderated with a calculated calm, asking standard questions about inspiration, study habits, and what intelligence means. When he reached Zariah, his smile was sharp enough to slice. "Miss Blake," he said smoothly, "your submission created quite a stir. Tell us, where did your theorem come from?" Zariah stiffened at the phrasing. "I developed it while working through some older college problems," she answered. He tilted his head. "And these problems were given to you?" "No," she replied. "I found them myself. In an old textbook." He raised an eyebrow. "So you had no mentorship, no guidance, just self-taught?" The room felt colder. Zariah nodded slowly. "Yes." "Well," Morrow said, turning to the crowd, "if it holds, it will certainly be unconventional." The audience chuckled, soft but unmistakable. Zariah's stomach turned. Later backstage, Miss Conway found her in a quiet hallway. "He's playing a game," she whispered. "Don't let him rattle you." Zariah gripped her notes tighter. "I don't care if he doubts me. I just want to be heard." Miss Conway smiled, touched her shoulder. "Then, speak louder than the doubt." Finally, it was time. The keynote sessions began. Morrow was the second to last speaker. Just before Zariah, he stood confidently at the podium and presented a lecture on legacy in mathematics. How standards were eroding in the digital age. How rigor was being replaced by viral visibility. His words were careful, but their target was clear. He never said Zariah's name. He didn't have to. Then it was her turn. Zariah walked onto the stage, her palms damp. The auditorium lights burned overhead. She plugged in her presentation. The slides flickered. The graphs failed to animate. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. "Still," she started. Her voice wavered at first, barely reaching the back row. "My name is Zariah Blake. I'm a 9th grade student. And today I'd like to present a theorem I developed. One that may offer a new lens into the Aurelian loop problem." Her clicker stalled. She moved manually. Behind her, the screen showed skewed formulas, broken transitions. "I apologize for the formatting errors," she said, lifting her chin. "But the math remains." She picked up a marker and turned to the whiteboard. What followed wasn't flashy. It wasn't choreographed. But it was undeniable. Zariah walked the crowd through her logic, step by step. Her cadence sharpened with each transition. She used metaphors, musical harmonies to describe symmetry, street grids to describe topologies. Every equation flowed like a sentence. The murmurs stopped. The room held its breath. At one point, Morrow cleared his throat loudly. "Can you justify step 7, Miss Blake? Your second vector seems unsupported." Zariah turned, unfazed. "I considered that. If you look at the transformation here," she gestured, "you'll see it emerges as a natural consequence of the ring structure's constraint." A pause. Morrow blinked. The crowd shifted. And then, silence. Her final slide appeared, an adjusted conclusion written live on the board. Not only had she defended her logic, she'd advanced it under pressure. The audience erupted. Not a cheer yet. A gasp. A recognition. It wasn't showmanship. It was truth. When she stepped off stage, her legs shook. Janice ran to her, arms wide, eyes glassy. "You did it, baby. You did it." Miss Conway clutched her phone tightly. She had recorded every moment. Within hours, a student uploaded a clip to Twitter with the caption, "Janitor's daughter school's tenured math professor." It caught fire. By morning, the video had 3.4 million views. Articles followed. Blog posts. Think pieces. Zariah's inbox flooded. One message stood out. It came from the admissions department of the Halcyon Institute of Mathematics, a top-tier program that rarely accepted undergraduates. "Ms. Blake, we would like to formally offer you a full scholarship to study with us beginning this fall. We believe your mind belongs where equations are born." Zariah read it aloud, voice trembling. Janice cried openly, clutching her daughter to her chest. But Zariah didn't smile yet, because behind the glow of the screen, another message had arrived. Anonymous. No subject. Just 3 words. "This isn't over." As Zariah prepares to accept the scholarship, she receives word that Professor Morrow has filed an official claim questioning the authorship of her theorem, accusing her of academic theft. The morning after the symposium, Zariah's world split open. The clip of her calmly dismantling Professor Morrow's interruption mid-presentation had become the internet's favorite academic takedown. Her steady tone, the fluid command of mathematical language, and the pointed return to logic after being publicly cornered, was dubbed the quiet slap that echoed across the ivory tower. The video shot past 3 million views by breakfast. News outlets scrambled for interviews. Headlines multiplied. From custodial closets to calculus queen. Teen math prodigy outwits tenured gatekeeper. Zariah Blake in the theorem that shook the system. But where there was light, darkness followed. Beneath the tidal wave of admiration came a slow, ugly undertow of doubt. In the comment sections, anonymous avatars typed with venom. "No way a 14-year-old wrote that. Guarantee someone else did it. And she's just the face. She speaks like she's trying to sound smart. Feels rehearsed. How'd she get in? Her mom cleaned the building, right?" Then came the more overt ones. "This is what happens when you hand out scholarships like candy." Bet she'd fold on a real test. "Let's see her solve something without a script or sympathy." Zariah read the comments late at night when she couldn't sleep, her thumb scrolling through bile dressed as curiosity. The worst ones weren't even profane. They were surgical. Words meant to gut her spirit without making a sound. She never replied. But the silence began to feel like surrender. Janice tried to block it out entirely. She banned her daughter from reading replies, switched off notifications, and started collecting the printed letters instead. The fan mail from classrooms across the country, from young black girls scribbling "I want to be like Zariah" on wide-ruled notebook paper. But even Janice couldn't keep the wolves out. Someone posted their home address. Photoshopped images began circulating. Zariah's face on stolen memes. Edited quotes from her speech twisted into something arrogant, tone-deaf. When a news crew showed up outside their apartment complex unannounced, Janice stood between them and her daughter, with the rage of a mother bear. "My child is not your circus," she said through gritted teeth. "Step back." Yet even as they shut their front door to the chaos, the storm only grew. Some of the largest educational platforms asked Zariah to record her explanation of the theorem. Ivy League math departments invited her to sit in on lectures. The Halcyon Institute publicly reaffirmed their scholarship offer. They even hinted at building a Blake Fellowship in her honor. Still, Zariah didn't smile much. The attacks had turned inward. She started second-guessing her own work. Every new problem she approached felt heavier, like her pencil had to push through all the doubt before it could reach the paper. She began speaking more softly in public, afraid her words would be parsed, ridiculed, misunderstood. Ms. Conway, now a quiet but loyal presence, saw the shift. One afternoon she found Zariah sitting on the back steps of Eastwood High, scribbling in her notebook with none of the usual joy in her eyes. You know, Conway began, sitting beside her. The moment Galileo challenged the church, they called him a heretic. Not because he was wrong, but because he made them feel small. Zariah didn't look up. I don't want to be a revolution, she muttered. I just wanted to solve something. Miss Conway sighed. You did. You solved more than a theorem. You cracked something bigger, something scarier. Zariah finally met her gaze. Then why does it feel like I'm losing? Because they taught you that surviving their system wasn't enough. That you had to be silent about it too. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was saturated. With fear, with anger, with clarity. That night, another shift occurred. An unexpected twist. An old video surfaced on Reddit. The footage was grainy, likely from a forgotten security camera. It showed Professor Declan Morrow in the faculty break room at Hawthorne University, speaking to two other professors during a coffee break. Janice could be seen in the background, wiping down counters. Morrow's voice, clear enough despite the age of the footage, said, "You ever notice how the janitors move like ghosts? Quiet until you trip over one. That's how they like it, staying invisible until they pop out with another sad scholarship story." The room had laughed. Janice never flinched, never turned. Just kept wiping the same table, face expressionless. The video hit Twitter like a lightning bolt. Caught on tape. Professor Morrow mocking university janitors. This is who Zariah faced. And B. No apologies yet from Hawthorne faculty. Within hours, the university's public email was flooded. Alumni began demanding Morrow's resignation. Petitions circled. Students called for accountability. Protesters began posting signs outside the campus gates. We sweep the floors, not our dignity. Zariah sat frozen as the video played on loop on every major news outlet. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with recognition. That had been her mother in the background. The very day she'd first entered the math building. The day Morrow dismissed her for simply existing near a chalkboard. She had carried that moment in silence for years. Now it was public. Janice didn't say much when the video hit. She simply poured herself a glass of water, sat beside her daughter, and said, "Let them see what we've been living." The next day, a formal statement was released from the president of Hawthorne University. "We are aware of a video involving Professor Declan Morrow and his conduct toward university staff. We take these allegations seriously and have launched an internal investigation effective immediately." Zariah blinked as she read it again and again. Internal investigation. The words felt powerful, official. But they were also a signal, a starting gun. This was not the end. It was the beginning of something much larger. Something the university couldn't control. That night, a sealed envelope arrives at Zariah's apartment. Inside, a subpoena. Morrow is suing for defamation, naming Zariah and her mother as co-defendants. Zariah's name was now carved into academic headlines. Yet inside the walls of Eastwood High, it felt like nothing had changed, except for the weight she carried. Every step through the hallway felt more calculated now, more watched. Her peers no longer ignored her. They studied her like a rumor that refused to die. Some whispered admiration, others watched with open resentment. In second period algebra, as she handed in a test she'd finished with time to spare, her teacher, Mr. Rayleigh, a man who had once taught her with casual indifference, flipped through her paper with a tight jaw. He didn't even look up. "Zariah, did someone help you with this?" She frowned, confused. "No, sir. I studied." His fingers tapped the edge of her test. "Well, I'll need to verify some of these solutions. They're advanced." Zariah's chest tightened. "But I thought you said the test was basic." "I said it was straightforward for this class," he interrupted. "You seem to be writing at a level beyond it, which is interesting." The word interesting landed like a slap. Later that week, during gym class, she overheard a boy behind her whispering to another student. "Yeah, she got into Halcyon. You know why?" The other snorted. "Of course. They need diversity numbers. Handout genius." Zariah froze mid-stretch, their voices ringing louder than the basketballs bouncing behind them. She kept her eyes ahead, biting the inside of her cheek, until she tasted metal. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. But the words stuck, clinging to the inside of her brain like wet ash. She went home that day quieter than usual. Janice noticed. She always noticed. "You're holding it all in again, baby," she said gently as she ladled soup into bowls. Don't let 'em rent space in your head. Zariah nodded, but didn't eat. At night, she returned to the only place that made sense. Her notebooks. The equations didn't lie. They didn't assume. They didn't ask for proof of her belonging. Yet even they were no longer easy. Her mind felt cluttered with all the noise, doubt, expectation, the gnawing sense that no matter what she solved, she'd still be seen as an anomaly, or worse, an imposter. One night, while staring at an unfinished equation, a strange idea hit her. She dropped her pencil, grabbed her sketch pad, and started drawing shapes instead of formulas. Triangles, spirals, arcs nested inside parabolas. What if you could see the proof instead of chasing it symbol by symbol? What if math could be approached the way artists approached canvas? It became an obsession. She began designing an algorithm that translated complex algebraic relationships into visual representations. The shapes behaved like puzzles, organizing data, until the answer revealed itself through balance and symmetry. It wasn't just beautiful. It was functional. By the end of the week, Zariah had built a primitive prototype using free online tools. She tested it on problems from her Halcyon preview syllabus. Every time, the algorithm gave a visual that helped solve the equation faster. The pattern was no longer a coincidence. Her mind didn't just understand math. It reinvented how it could be approached. Still, she kept it hidden. Because something else was happening. She was becoming a symbol. Magazines called her a beacon. Panels invited her to speak about the future of representation. Schools sent her t-shirts and photos of math clubs inspired by her. Everyone wanted her smile, her hope, her narrative, but no one seemed to want her. No one asked how it felt to walk into class and be doubted every day. To be 16 and sued by a man who once laughed in your face. To smile on camera, while being told behind closed doors that she wasn't polished enough for primetime interviews. Miss Conway tried to shield her from the chaos, but even she couldn't block it all. At home, Janice worked longer shifts to cover legal costs. The lawsuit hadn't gone away. It had only gone quiet while the university scrambled behind the scenes. One night, Zariah overheard her mother on the phone with a legal aid representative, voice cracking under the weight. We don't want no settlement. She earned it. She earned every inch of that spotlight. We're not giving this up. Zariah shut her door softly and returned to her desk. The algorithm stared back at her, glowing faintly on the cracked screen. It was hers undeniably, but so was the pressure. So was the fear. When the National Youth Scholars Conference announced she'd be one of the featured speakers, Zariah didn't feel pride. She felt dread. It was the biggest event yet. 5,000 attendees, media coverage, live streams to universities around the world. It was also where she planned to debut her algorithm. She worked non-stop in the days leading up to the event, refining the visuals, creating animations to show real-time proof reductions. Ms. Conway helped with the script. Janice packed her daughter's suitcase with trembling hand. You're gonna change the world, she whispered. But Zariah barely smiled, because deep down she wasn't sure she wanted to be the face of a movement anymore. She just wanted to be left alone with her math, her thoughts, her peace. The conference hall was enormous, too enormous. As she stood backstage, mic clipped to her collar, slides loaded, crowd humming beyond the curtain, her breath shortened, her heart pounded like a hammer inside her chest. The spotlight she had once dreamed of now felt like an interrogation lamp. The announcer's voice boomed over the PA. Our next speaker needs no introduction. Zariah Blake. Applause. Cheering. But Zariah didn't move. Her legs wouldn't work. Ms. Conway looked over, alarmed. Zariah? Zariah's vision blurred. Her hands were trembling violently. Her notes dropped to the floor. She gasped, struggling to inhale. I can't breathe. Backstage staff swarmed, ushering her to a chair. Someone pulled her mic off. Another poured water. The applause faded as whispers swept the crowd. Miss Conway knelt beside her, holding her hand, trying to speak, but Zariah heard nothing. Just static, just shame. The girl who stood against Morrow, who lit up the internet, who built her own theorem, was now curled in a chair, unable to walk 10 feet to a podium. And then someone in the back, too loudly, asked, Is she backing out? A few chuckled. The silence that followed was worse. Zariah stared at the ground, eyes wide, the weight of it all crashing down. She wasn't afraid of math. She was afraid of what it had turned her into in their eyes. An expectation, a brand, a battle. And she couldn't do it. Not tonight. As she's escorted out a side exit to avoid press, a hush falls over the crowd, because Morrow has just walked into the auditorium and taken a front row seat, smiling. The ambulance lights didn't flash. The organizers wanted discretion. When Zariah was wheeled out the side exit of the auditorium, her hoodie pulled low and face hidden, only a handful of people saw her. Ms. Conway, a conference coordinator and one photographer who respectfully lowered his camera. Inside, Morrow watched the empty stage where Zariah had been scheduled to speak. His smile was slight but unmistakable, like a man watching a prophecy fulfill itself. She couldn't handle the pressure, he murmured to a colleague beside him. Genius is more than calculation. It's composure. Backstage, Miss Conway held Zariah's shaking hand in the corridor as paramedics examined her. Her blood pressure was high. Her limbs were cold. Her speech, fragmented. I don't know what's wrong with me. Zariah kept repeating. I'm not sick. I'm not. Yes, you are, Miss Conway said softly. And it's not your fault. Janice was notified within the hour. She arrived at the hospital in a borrowed coat, breathless and terrified. When she entered the small recovery room, Zariah was already hooked to an IV, her skin pale under fluorescent lights. Mama, she whispered. Janice rushed to her side, pulled her daughter's head to her chest, and rocked her gently, whispering nothing but breath and heartbeat. For the first time in weeks, Zariah wept. The diagnosis was clear: exhaustion, anxiety, and burnout, compounded by emotional trauma. The doctors recommended extended rest, therapy, and removal from any public engagements for at least 6 weeks. News traveled fast. Social media was a firestorm again, this time divided. Hashtags like "Shand with Zariah" trended within hours, filled with stories from other young students who'd broken down under expectations, under scrutiny, under silence. But so did another trend: Lake breakdown. Trolls celebrated. She cracked just like we said she would. Gifted? More like fragile. Typical. Cry racism until it's time to deliver. Janice shut it all down. She blocked notifications. She rejected every press inquiry, every publishing offer. Even when a major book imprint offered a 5-figure advance for her story, she said, "My baby's not a product. She's a person. A child. Let her breathe." Zariah spent her first week at home mostly in silence. She sat in her room with the curtains closed, her notebooks untouched. The algorithm remained saved on a flash drive she didn't want to look at. The Halcyon Institute called 3 times. She didn't answer. Ms. Conway texted every day. Most messages went unread. Then on the 12th day, something changed. A letter arrived, handwritten. No return address. It was in looping cursive that reminded Zariah of old report cards. Dear Zariah, you don't know me, but I know you. I was the first black girl in my school's math league. I lasted 1 semester. The jokes, the rumors, the dismissals, I believed them. Then I saw you. And for a second I wished I had stayed. But then I realized, maybe I didn't have to go back. Maybe I just had to reach out to the one who never left. If you're willing, I'd love to talk. I think we can help each other heal. Avery, age 17, Detroit. Zariah reread it 3 times. Then she sat down and wrote back. 2 days later they met on a Zoom call. Avery was bright-eyed, nervous, and sharp. She had the kind of mind that dissected equations like songs, fluid, intuitive, fast. But like Zariah, her confidence had been bruised, not by failure but by invisibility. They spoke for hours about math, about fear, about the absurd weight of always having to be twice as good for half the credit. By the 3rd call they weren't just talking. They were plotting. Do you know how many kids are like us? Avery asked. How many got pushed out before they could even find out they were brilliant? Zariah nodded slowly. Too many. So what if we built something for them? Avery leaned forward. Something they don't own. Something for us. That night, they drafted the first outlines of a project. Mindset Mathematics Initiative for Neglected, Disregarded, and Suppressed Exceptional Talent. A mentorship program that paired black and brown students with mathematicians of color. Virtual lectures. Peer support. A hotline for reporting academic discrimination. A scholarship arm. An open-source database of advanced concepts explained in accessible language, free from gatekeeping. Zariah felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Purpose. She called Ms. Conway that night. I want to do something different, she said. something they can't sabotage. Ms. Conway exhaled on the other end of the line. You just say the word Z. Avery's mother was a grant writer. Janice found a friend in her union who knew how to file nonprofit paperwork. Miss Conway tapped into her university network. Within 3 weeks, the idea was no longer just a dream. It had a name, a structure, and a mission. Morrow's lawsuit remained dormant but looming. But Zariah no longer felt caged by it. Instead of waiting for courtrooms and conferences, she began recording short lessons from her bedroom, using a borrowed ring light. The first video, Why You're Not Bad at Math, You're Just Ignored, reached 200,000 views in 4 days. Emails poured in from students, from parents, from teachers. One message stood out. My son has autism and never talked in class. After watching your video, he stayed up until 3 a.m. solving his first algebra problem. Thank you. Zariah cried when she read it. Not because of the praise, but because for once, it wasn't about her. It was about someone else. About a door she had kicked open, staying open for others. A month after her collapse, she stood on a small stage at a community math expo in Chicago. No national cameras. No pressure, just folding chairs, poster boards, and secondhand projectors. She and Avery presented their vision for mindset to an audience of 5. When they finished, everyone stood. Not because they were impressed, but because they felt seen. As the applause dies down, a figure steps out from the back of the room, an academic representative from the National Science Fund. Miss Blake, he says, we've been watching, and we'd like to fund your program. Fully. The funding offer from the National Science Fund changed everything. With a fully backed budget, Zariah and Avery transformed mindset from a blueprint into a movement. They hired a tiny team, mostly volunteers from underfunded schools and early career Black educators. Their video series exploded in popularity, especially among inner-city students and marginalized rural communities. A traveling math lab was drafted. Zariah's inbox filled with invitations from middle schools to major conferences alike. But as the light on Zariah grew brighter, the shadows deepened. At Hawthorne University, the place where the first seed of her genius was planted and spat on, the old guard stirred. Professor Declan Morrow, still fuming from his fall from grace, had not forgotten. Though publicly quiet after his lawsuit stalled, privately, he sharpened his tactics. He began discreetly funding a think tank-style publication, the Merit Ledger, a glossy online academic review positioned as a watchdog for excellence. Within weeks, they published a piece titled Affirmation or Achievement, the New Wave of Emotional Math. The article never named Zariah directly. It didn't have to. It used phrases like celebrity youth theorists, social justice-driven academics, and emotionally insulated thinkers. It questioned whether viral fame was being confused with academic rigor, whether new initiatives like mindset risked prioritizing optics over outcome. The piece spread like an oil slick among elite universities. Faculty emails were abuzz. Graduate forums lit up. Journal editors, once quietly excited about Zariah's follow-up paper on geometric logic, began to grow cold. 2 major math journals rejected her submission within a week. The feedback? Vague, important topic, but not within current scope. Promising, but lacking traditional framing. Miss Conway was the first to speak the truth. They're blacklisting you. Zariah blinked. For what? For changing the game, she replied flatly. And for not asking permission. The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was recognition. Then came the chat logs. It began with an anonymous tip. A former teaching assistant from Hawthorne, now working elsewhere, sent Zariah a password-protected folder via Proton Mail. Inside, screenshots, dozens. A private group chat among select Hawthorne faculty, tenured professors, adjuncts, and even some administrative staff. It had a name. Ivory Discourse. At first, the messages were sarcastic, smug, comments about celebrity math culture, the romanticism of underdog stories, and jabs at Mindset's TED Talk activism. But then, it turned cruel. Screenshots of Zariah's videos with captions like, "We really letting Janitor's kids dictate theory now. Affirmative action meets YouTube University. She's more mascot than mathematician." One professor shared a meme, Zariah's face photoshopped onto a McDonald's worker, taking orders with the caption, "You want fries with that proof." Another, "Genius doesn't come with a side of oppression." Zariah read every line, every message. Her hands shook, not from shock, but from the clarity that came with undeniable truth. These were not trolls in basements. These were respected scholars, people who controlled grants, fellowships, journal space, people who had shaped the pipeline she was building alternatives to. She could have burned it all, posted the screenshots with her name on them, called them out one by one. Instead, she made a different decision. At 3 a.m., using a ghost account and a timed release app, Zariah leaked the entire chat transcript to EdInsider, a major education news site known for fearless reporting. She included one sentence: "If this is what excellence looks like, no wonder so many of us stopped trying." By sunrise, it was viral. The fallout was instant and ferocious. Hawthorne University's administration scrambled to contain the damage. Their public statement was cautious, almost sterile. "We are aware of inappropriate faculty conduct and are launching a formal investigation into the matter." But the pressure didn't ease. Students at Hawthorne staged a walkout. Black faculty across several departments signed an open letter condemning the institution's rotting culture of academic elitism and racism. National media outlets pounced. Even late-night hosts picked it up, some reading the cruelest chat messages aloud to stunned audiences. Morrow, caught red-handed as a frequent contributor in the chat, initially denied involvement until logs of his university email revealed multiple internal links to the chat's archive. He had no way out. Hawthorne suspended him pending a disciplinary review. Zariah sat across from her mother in their kitchen, the news playing in the background. Janice was silent, her fingers gripping a tea mug. "He's suspended," Zariah said softly. Janice nodded. "Good." But there was no celebration, no cheers, just the long, slow exhale of justice that came too late and cost too much. Still, Zariah didn't feel relief. She felt resolve. That week, she released a new mindset video titled, "What They Think of Us." It opened with a screen grab of the chat's cruelest message, followed by a direct-to-camera monologue. "You think I'm here to be your mascot? You think I want a trophy for surviving a system you built to exclude me? No, I want something better. For all of us." It was viewed over 6 million times in 5 days. The impact reverberated. Students at other schools began anonymously sharing similar group chats, message boards, and whisper networks that had long served as tools of exclusion. A nationwide reckoning began, one that stretched beyond math, beyond academia, one that finally asked, what does merit really mean, and who defines it? But Zariah didn't linger in the chaos. She kept building. She and Avery expanded Mindset into 5 more cities. They held weekend workshops, released translated content, partnered with grassroots libraries. The goal wasn't just access, it was ownership. Zariah no longer wanted a seat at their table. She was building her own. Still, one piece remained. Morrow. Though suspended, he wasn't gone. He hadn't apologized. And despite mounting pressure, the university had yet to issue a final verdict. Miss Conway met Zariah in the park that weekend. They sat under a tree, watching joggers pass and kids climb jungle gyms. "You did it," Miss Conway said. "You exposed it all." Zariah nodded. "But what happens next?" Miss Conway exhaled. "That depends on how loud you want to get." Zariah looked down at her notebook. Inside, another theorem had started forming. Something bigger, not academic, not abstract, something personal. She called it the equation of equity, and it started with subtraction. Remove the rot. As Hawthorne prepares to announce its final decision on morrow, Zariah receives a confidential email. A vote has been taken, and one of the board members has threatened to resign if Morrow is fired. The email arrived at midnight, unsigned, untraceable, but unmistakably real. The vote was 4-1. One board member threatened to resign if Morrow is removed. The decision is being stalled. Zariah read it 3 times, her eyes scanning the lines like they were written in code. But there was no cipher to solve, no hidden variable. Just one truth. Justice was not a function of right and wrong. It was a system flawed and rigged. She didn't tell Janice right away. She closed her laptop, lay back on her bed, and stared at the ceiling, as though it might offer a formula for surviving this latest twist. She had exposed the rot, given them proof, brought the evidence, the backlash, the public rage, and still, it was negotiable. The next morning, the protest signs were everywhere. "This is what genius looks like. No more Morrow. If she can't stay, we won't either." Students had begun organizing days earlier, but now the momentum had exploded. Hundreds lined the lawn in front of Hawthorne's administration building. Local media vans camped out across the street. Alumni from classes going back 3 decades posted letters online, some publicly threatening to withhold donations until a culture of silence and white supremacy is formally uprooted. The university had no choice. A formal board hearing was announced, one open to press, students and faculty. The agenda addressed the accusations against Professor Morrow and determine next steps. But what no one expected was the board's second line item, a request to hear testimony from Zariah Blake. The moment her name hit the announcement, social media erupted. This is it. Time for her to speak. Not just in code. Zariah walks in. Morrow walks out. Janice was quiet when she read the notice. She stood at the sink washing the same dish for 5 full minutes. "You don't have to do this, baby," she said finally. "You don't owe them a damn thing." Zariah looked at her mother, calm but resolute. "I'm not doing it for them." Janice turned, eyes glassy. "Then who?" Zariah folded her arms, voice steady. "For every kid who stopped showing up because someone made them feel like an exception instead of the example." The hearing was set for a Friday. The university auditorium, usually used for guest lectures and debates, was rearranged to resemble a tribunal. A long table at the front held the 5 board members, all older, all polished, each holding binders thicker than belief. Morrow sat to the right, wearing a dark navy suit, no pad in front of him, no emotion on his face. Next to him, his lawyer adjusted his tie like it might choke the truth. The crowd was silent when Zariah entered. She wore no suit, no makeup, no practiced expression, just a simple white shirt, black slacks, and her mother's old janitor ID clipped to her belt. The room held its breath. A board member cleared her throat. "Miss Blake, thank you for being here. You may begin." Zariah didn't use notes. She didn't pace. She just stood at the center, looked directly at the people who thought the vote still belonged to them, and spoke. "When I was 14, I sat in the back of this campus, while my mother cleaned the floors. I watched a professor solve equations on a board, and I dreamed of understanding them, not for recognition, not for rebellion, but because I believed truth lived in those numbers." A hush, eyes locked on her. "But what I didn't know," she continued, "was that math isn't the only system where logic can be twisted, where proof is never enough if it comes from the wrong person, where the variables aren't numbers, but names, skin color, income, zip codes." She paused. A few gasps. Cameras clicked. This university has built itself on the illusion of merit. But merit without access is just privilege dressed up in statistics. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably. Zariah didn't flinch. "I didn't come here to plead. I came to show my work. And I've done that. You've seen the theorem. You've seen the chat logs. You've seen the way your faculty laughed while demeaning the same janitor whose daughter outperformed them." A murmur moved through the audience. Zariah leaned in slightly, her voice quiet, razor sharp. "You want to talk about equations? Here's one. Talent minus opportunity equals waste. Opportunity minus fairness equals rot. And rot divided by silence equals tradition." Silence. Breathless. "I'm not asking for you to fire a man who mocked me. I'm asking you to decide whether this place has the integrity to admit when it got something wrong." She turned, looked directly at Morrow for the first time. "And I'm not the variable in this equation anymore. You are." With that, she stepped away. The room erupted. Applause. Standing ovations. Some faculty members cried openly. A live feed online spiked to over 1 million viewers. The board called a recess. For 37 minutes, the university held its breath. Outside, students continued chanting. Inside, Zariah sat with Janice and Miss Conway, in a side room, silent. When the board returned, the chair cleared her throat. "We have reached a decision." Morrow shifted in his seat, eyes narrowing slightly. "Effective immediately, Professor Declan Morrow is terminated from his role at Hawthorne University." Gasps. Cheers. Applause. Zariah closed her eyes, not in triumph, but in release. Janice clutched her hand, whispering, "It's over, baby." But Zariah knew better. This was not the end. It was the end of his chapter. Hers was still unfolding. As the hearing disperses, a faculty assistant quietly slips Zariah a note. Scribbled in rushed ink, "Morrow wasn't working alone. You need to see the files in the archives. They buried more than your proof." Zariah stood alone in the archive room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their hum filling the stale silence of the university's basement floor. The walls were lined with dusty boxes, decades of institutional memory packed and forgotten. just like the names that never made it to department plaques or published journals. She clutched the note in her hand, the one passed to her after Morrow's termination, its message still sharp in her chest. Morrow wasn't working alone. You need to see the files in the archives. They buried more than your proof. She hadn't told anyone. Not Janice. Not Miss Conway. Not even Avery. Something about the note, its urgency, its anonymity felt like a puzzle meant for her alone. Box after box, she sifted through old faculty records, tenure recommendations, peer reviews, and finally a folder labeled Supplemental Student Submissions. Denied. She pulled it out, her fingers trembling slightly, and flipped through dozens of rejection letters addressed to students, most of them from marginalized backgrounds. Tucked between two folders, she found a faded transcript of a handwritten proof. The handwriting was tight, elegant. The name at the bottom made her knees weaken. Zariah Blake. Her father. She sank to the ground, the floor cold against her legs, her mind spinning. The proof wasn't complete, but the structure was there. An early version of the same concept she had independently developed years later. It wasn't plagiarism. It was legacy. Morrow had been on the admissions committee the year it was submitted. Zariah sat for a long time in silence. She wasn't just solving for herself anymore. The next chapter of her life came faster than expected. 3 weeks after the hearing, a letter arrived from the Halcyon Institute, not just reaffirming their previous offer, but elevating it. Due to the significance of your continued contributions to the field of mathematics, we would like to offer you early PhD admission to our program, with full scholarship, housing stipend, and research assistantship. Zariah was 17. She read the letter twice, then quietly walked to the kitchen, where Janice was folding laundry. She handed her the letter without a word. Janice looked down, read silently, and slowly sat on the edge of a chair. Tears filled her eyes before she could even finish. My baby's going to be a doctor. Zariah knelt beside her. Because of you, Mama. Every floor you mopped, every night you stayed up with me. It wasn't for nothing. Janice reached for her daughter's hand and placed something small in her palm. A rusted plastic ID card, with the name Janice Blake printed above the words custodial staff. Zariah turned it over gently. You carry that in your backpack, Janice whispered, voice tight. Not to remember who you were, but who we are. The day she arrived at Halcyon's campus felt unreal. She didn't blend in. She didn't try to. The media had begun calling her the girl who solved the silence. But Zariah knew better than to get lost in titles. She kept her head down, her notebooks full, and her purpose clear. Her dorm walls were bare except for one taped image. A photo of her and her mom standing in front of Eastwood High's trophy case, her acceptance letter held like a flag between them. Professors approached her with caution, half respect, half curiosity. But Zariah gave them no room to misplace her. Her theorems came fast. Her logic was airtight. Her name began appearing not just in articles, but in footnotes, citations, and finally in lecture slides. One professor, after a particularly intense seminar, leaned over to whisper, "You're not just changing how we solve problems, you're changing who gets to write them." She smiled slightly. Good. Back home, Janice still worked, though less now. The world had opened a little. Zariah had made sure of that. Her nonprofit mindset had expanded into 11 cities. Avery handled operations while Zariah pursued her doctorate. But they still spoke every night. The mission hadn't changed. If anything, the need had grown. Then came the email. It was from a major textbook publisher. Subject: invitation to collaborate on a new edition. Body: we are producing a new foundational mathematics textbook, and would be honored to feature your theorem as the opening chapter. Your name will appear as co-author. We want students across the world to begin their journey with your work. Zariah sat in stunned silence, her laptop glowing softly in the dark of her dorm. Not appendix. Not case study. Opening chapter. She called Janice immediately. Mama, she whispered, tears welling up. They want to teach me. Janice laughed, that deep, shaking laugh that only comes after decades of struggle. No, baby, she said. They have to. Zariah clicked reply, and typed one sentence. Only if I can write the introduction myself. As she begins drafting her introduction, Zariah receives an encrypted message from an academic whistleblower. Your father's original paper wasn't just rejected, it was stolen, and published under someone else's name. The day Zariah opened the first draft of the new textbook, she didn't cry. She didn't gasp, or celebrate, or even smile. She simply sat at her desk in the quiet of her halcyon dorm room, reading every word of the chapter that bore her name. The title of the first section read, Chapter 1, The Blake Theorem, Seeing Structure in Silence. And beneath it, just as she'd requested, her own sentence appeared before the first proof. Before I learned math, I learned how to be overlooked. She was not alone on the byline. She had insisted that the textbook be co-authored with two other mathematicians, one Latina, one non-binary, who had long operated in the shadows of prestigious institutions without recognition. And it wasn't just names. She fought for structure too. The book included interactive visuals, culturally contextualized word problems, historical overviews of mathematicians of color, and alternative teaching models for students with learning differences. Every chapter ended with a section titled Legacy Equations, highlighting contributions from thinkers often excluded from mainstream syllabi. It was not just a textbook. It was a declaration. The publisher loved the concept at first. But as the final draft circulated among reviewers, tension began to mount. Some school boards balked at the language. One superintendent said the chapter on educational bias bordered on activism. A conservative think tank issued a formal critique, accusing Zariah of embedding racial grievance into STEM education. The pushback turned political when Senator Mark Hollis of Georgia took to the Senate floor with a printed copy of the chapter. This book, he said, shaking it before cameras, isn't teaching math. It's pushing division. It's telling our children that skin color is a prerequisite for understanding numbers. The clip made national headlines. Zariah watched it in her dorm, arms crossed, jaw tight. They're scared, Avery said on a video call that night. Not of your math. Of your mirror. Teachers across the country came to her defense. A math teacher in Oklahoma filmed a TikTok breaking down the divisive chapter and ending with, "This book just gave one of my students her first A. That's not division, that's equity." The clip went viral. Students started posting under the hashtag, "From Janitor to Genius." It wasn't Zariah's creation. It began on a high school forum, then exploded. Students tagged their own stories of being underestimated, dismissed, passed over. Some posted pictures holding the textbook in front of their school. Others shared clips of themselves solving Zariah's theorem, their hands shaking with pride. Zariah's inbox overflowed again, this time with notes that made her cry. One read, "I used to hide my math notebook. Now I carry it on top." Another, "They told me my accent meant I couldn't do algebra. This book helped me prove them wrong." Meanwhile, her public speaking invitations multiplied. She began appearing at conferences, not as a novelty, but as an expert. Still, every time she walked to a podium, she felt the weight of her mother's ID card in her bag. She had laminated it. The plastic was cracked, but the name still shined. Janice Blake. The National Education Conference in Chicago was the largest yet. She stood before 4,000 educators, policymakers, and scholars. Cameras broadcasted the session live. Her face appeared on 3 massive projection screens behind her. "I didn't come here today to talk about math," she began. "I came to talk about silence, about what it means to be brilliant and still have to beg to be believed." A low hum moved through the crowd. "My first math teacher gave me detention for correcting a mistake on the board. My first submission was questioned because of my zip code. And my first major breakthrough was almost erased by someone who thought my mother's job disqualified me from intelligence." Murmurs of anger and applause echoed. "I'm not the only one, and I won't be the last. But if this textbook does anything, I hope it reminds every student who's ever been told to stay quiet, that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is show your work." She ended to a standing ovation. That night, as she prepared to leave the venue, a well-dressed woman intercepted her near the elevators. "Zariah Blake?" Zariah paused. "Yes?" The woman smiled and handed her a business card embossed with silver lettering. Holland Rose Preparatory Academy. Astic 189, Excellence Through Legacy. "I'm Dr. Erin Royce," she said, extending her hand. "We've followed your work closely, and we'd like to invite you to teach a guest seminar series at our school next semester. We believe our students would benefit from your perspective." Zariah raised an eyebrow. "Holland Rose? Isn't that the same school that called the textbook biased?" Dr. Royce laughed gently. "Some in our administration did, but our students disagreed. They held a walkout, demanded we integrate your chapter into our curriculum." Zariah's expression shifted. Dr. Royce nodded. "We listened, and now we'd like to listen to you." Zariah took the card, considering this wasn't a peace offering. It was a pivot. The old guard was learning to cloak resistance in politeness. But Zariah had learned too. Learned how to hold power, how to say yes without surrendering. "I'll think about it," she said. Dr. Royce smiled, satisfied. "We hope you do." As Zariah rode the elevator up to her hotel room, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was encrypted, just like the one that had led her to the archives. She opened it carefully. "Your father's original paper wasn't just rejected, it was stolen, and published under someone else's name. Check Journal of Abstract Structures." Her breath caught. She dropped her bag on the floor, sat down and opened her laptop. She navigated to the digital archive, Journal of Abstract Structures, Volume 63. The article's title hit her first. On Silent Symmetries, A New Approach to Converging Fields. Then the author, D. Morrow. Her hands shook. Zariah scrolls to the appendix and finds her father's original handwritten diagrams, copied line for line with no credit. Her heart pounds as she realizes this wasn't sabotage. It was theft, and it had already been rewarded. The invitation came in a thick, cream-colored envelope. At the top, embossed in elegant silver script, Hawthorne University Department of Mathematics, 125th Anniversary Distinguished Lecture Series, and beneath it, "We are honored to invite Dr. Zariah Blake to return to Hawthorne University as our keynote speaker for the 25th Anniversary Lecture Series. Her groundbreaking contributions to the field, and to equity in education, embody the future we now strive to build." Zariah held the letter in her hands for a long time. Not because she didn't know how to respond, but because she did. She accepted. But on her terms. She arrived on campus 3 months later, wearing a tailored charcoal coat, a navy turtleneck, and the same janitor's ID card clipped discreetly inside her tote bag. She didn't need to show it. She just needed to carry it. The quad was quieter than she remembered, but the walls had changed. Murals now lined the walkways. Massive, vivid portraits of underrepresented alumni, scholars of color, and first-generation students. One wall featured a mural of her own face, focused, her hair pulled back, eyes locked on a chalkboard mid-equation. Beside it, the quote she had given in her first post-symposium interview. "Brilliance isn't rare. Belief in brilliance is." Some students walking by turned, whispering, realizing it was her. Others asked to take a photo. Zariah smiled politely, but her mind was elsewhere, focused on the lecture ahead. She walked past the math building's entrance, still carrying the same brass placard over the door, and entered through a side entrance. A few faculty members recognized her. Most gave her space. The university had changed its face, but Zariah knew facades better than anyone. She arrived early at the auditorium. Room 2B. The same room. The same floor where she once stood, invisible while Professor Morrow degraded her existence to a footnote. Now the seats were packed. Students from across departments, faculty, press, even high schoolers bust in from surrounding cities. The energy was electric. Not reverent, but curious, expectant. Zariah stepped up to the podium, without ceremony. Her voice didn't need it. "Some of you know my name," she began. "Some of you know the story. But today, I'm not here as a story." She clicked the first slide. "I'm here as a mathematician, and I'd like to show you what I've been building." What followed was 40 minutes of spellbinding mathematics. Zariah unveiled her new research in computational topology, a theory that blended visual geometry, adaptive proofs, and applied machine learning. It wasn't just novel, it was scalable. Her method simplified chaotic data structures into visual clusters that revealed patterns previously considered computational noise. Students whispered. Professors leaned forward in their seats. Some filmed, others simply stared. Her final slide faded in. "Complexity," it read, "isn't the barrier, it's the bridge." Thunderous applause followed. Not the polite clapping of academic obligation, but the kind that rattled the bones of old buildings. After the session, she was guided to her temporary office, a symbolic gesture from the university. The corner room, once used by visiting scholars, now redesigned for her. The windows overlooked the quad. On the desk sat a framed photo of the symposium stage from 3 years ago. Zariah at the chalkboard, hands raised, her theorem unfolding. She let herself breathe, until she saw the envelope. It sat atop the inbox tray. No return address, no markings, just her name, handwritten Zariah Blake. The handwriting was sharp, familiar. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "You don't belong here. You never did. You're a ghost wearing borrowed brilliance. Stop digging. No signature. But Zariah's eyes locked on the handwriting of her name, on the envelope. And her memory, precise as ever, recognized it instantly. Mara. Her breath caught, but she didn't panic. She folded the note, slid it into her tote, and calmly left the office. Outside, the air was crisp. She walked the edge of campus. Processing. Morrow had been terminated. Publicly disgraced. Barred from academic institutions through an informal blackballing process that universities rarely admitted but always enforced. So why now? Why here? She called Miss Conway immediately. There's been a threat, Zariah said, voice flat. Conway didn't ask how she knew who it was. Do you want me to call the campus police? No, Zariah replied. I want to know how he got in. Later that night, she sat in her hotel room, scrolling through archived publications from Morrow's post-firing era. Most journals had scrubbed his name, but one open-access platform still listed a recent submission, a co-authored paper from 6 months ago. The co-author, Professor Emeritus Charles Whitlock, Hawthorne University. Zariah remembered him. A ghostly figure from her early encounters at Hawthorne. Always silent, always seated at the back of faculty meetings. She once caught him smirking during the symposium footage replayed on campus news. He hadn't vanished. He had gone underground. And Morrow hadn't worked alone. She picked up her notebook, flipped past pages of equations, and wrote a single word in bold ink. Proof. She would not run. She would not silence herself again. The next morning, Zariah enters her office to find the framed symposium photo shattered, replaced with a copy of Morrow's 2003 paper, and her father's stolen diagram circled in red ink. Zariah stood in her office doorway, staring at the broken glass. The framed photo of her first public theorem presentation, the one that had sat untouched for months, lay face down on the floor, the glass spiderwebbed into shards. But it wasn't the photo that made her knees go weak. It was what replaced it. A printed copy of the 2003 Journal of Abstract Structures paper, the one Morrow had published under his name. Her father's stolen diagram was circled in red ink. At the bottom, in scrawled handwriting she could now identify in her sleep, was a single phrase: originality is a fragile illusion. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply reached into her bag, pulled out her phone and took a photo of the page. Then, with steady hands, she bagged the entire mess into a manila envelope. It was time. Zariah had already traced the original note, left in her office weeks prior, the one warning her not to dig further. After a late night spent diving into metadata, email headers, and leaked forum posts, she had matched the IP of the note's digital draft to a location just outside Charleston, South Carolina. That alone wasn't damning, but the blog was. A new anonymous blog had surfaced, just days earlier. TruthOverTitles.com, a pretentious collection of pseudo-academic posts aiming to discredit viral math theories and their authors. While none of the entries named Zariah outright, the references were clear. A young black woman lauded by the media despite mathematical oversights, proofs that appear groundbreaking to the layman, but lack academic depth, and a legacy built on fabricated lineage. The final post was titled, Math's False Messiah, The Danger of Romanticized Genius. Zariah read every word, not out of pain, but precision. The writing style wasn't anonymous. It was Morrow's voice in every line, elevated, arrogant, and bitter. And tucked in the code of the blog's analytics, she found the smoking gun, a direct link to an old Hawthorne faculty email, once assigned to Morrow. That was enough. She filed a complaint with the university. But she didn't stop there. She submitted a formal legal notice to Morrow's last known address in South Carolina, attaching the evidence package with a cease and desist warning and requesting a restraining order. The court moved quickly, bolstered by her public profile and the direct link between the blog and his university email. The judge granted the order within 4 days. The next day, Morrow violated it. He showed up at a bookstore in Philadelphia where Zariah was scheduled to sign copies of the new textbook. He didn't speak. He stood outside, 10 feet from the window, his arms crossed. He left just before police arrived, but not before someone recognized him. Footage hit social media within the hour. Isn't that the professor who? Why is he still following her? The video went viral. He was arrested that night at a motel 30 miles outside the city. The headlines returned. Fallen professor violates restraining order against math prodigy. Harassment case reopens wounds in academia. Blake family demands accountability from institutions that shielded predators. Janice refused to give statements, but Zariah made one, standing outside the courthouse flanked by student organizers, educators, and her legal team. "I'm not here to bury Morrow," she said. "I'm here to unbury everything that made him possible." The press froze. Her voice was steady, tired, but righteous. For decades, people like him have thrived in the shadows of academia, hiding behind tenure, jargon, and legacy. But we don't live in shadows anymore, and neither should accountability. Her words rippled across the country. Soon after, over a dozen universities issued statements committing to internal reviews of tenure protections, whistleblower policies, and academic submission ethics. Independent platforms began compiling a list of accusations against faculty members who had quietly derailed the careers of young black scholars. Zariah's case was now more than hers. It was a reckoning. The Department of Education released a short statement, acknowledging concerns raised by the Blake case, and hinted at new initiatives. But it wasn't until a week later that the true shift occurred. A letter arrived. Official seal. Washington, D.C. return address. Zariah opened it slowly. The United States House Committee on Education and Labor would like to formally invite Dr. Zariah Blake to testify before Congress in the upcoming hearing on systemic inequities in higher education. She read the sentence again, letting the weight of it sink in. Her mother looked over from the kitchen table. "What is it, baby?" Zariah didn't answer immediately. She walked over, handed her the letter, and whispered, "They want me to tell the truth. On record." Janice blinked back tears. "Then go in there and give them more than they're ready for." Zariah nodded. But beneath her calm, a storm had begun to build. She had been hunted, harassed, and nearly erased. Not just by one man, but by a system that allowed him to operate unchecked. A system that praised her only after she forced them to. A system that taught brilliance was rare when it was simply unrecognized. She was ready to speak. To Congress. To history. But she also knew that standing on that stage would make her more visible than ever. And visibility, in her world, was never safety. The night before her congressional testimony, Zariah receives a confidential message from a retired Hawthorne administrator. "Before you speak tomorrow, you need to see the sealed file they never meant for you to find. It's about your father, and it changes everything." The marble floors of the Rayburn House office building echoed under Zariah's shoes, like a metronome. Each step was deliberate, measured. The press buzzed at the doors like static. Camera crews set up outside the chamber, their lenses waiting to capture the girl whose proof had silenced a professor, whose voice had rippled through an institution too used to erasing brilliance, that came dressed in overalls and brown skin. She'd barely slept the night before. The anonymous message from the retired Hawthorne administrator still lived in her phone, unopened since she read it once. "Before you speak tomorrow, you need to see the sealed file they never meant for you to find. It's about your father, and it changes everything." Zariah had stared at those words for hours, her mind spinning in every direction. She had already discovered the stolen proof. She had already exposed Morrow. What more could there be? But she had made a decision. She would testify first. Truth required order. When she entered the hearing room, a hush fell across the space. Rows of lawmakers, educators, and policy advisors turned to watch her approach the witness table. Her name placard was already in place. Dr. Zariah Blake, founder Mindset, mathematician, Halcyon Institute. Behind her sat Janice wearing a navy blazer and pearls. Avery was to her right, and Miss Conway just behind them, her hands folded like a prayer. Zariah took her seat. The chairman cleared his throat and addressed the chamber. "Today we welcome Dr. Zariah Blake, whose experiences have come to symbolize both the potential and the failures of our educational system. Dr. Blake, you may begin." She didn't read from her notes. Her voice, low but resonant, filled the room like a cello. "When I was 9, I used to walk behind my mother as she cleaned the hallways of Hawthorne University," she began. "Sometimes I'd sit in the back of classrooms after hours, not to cause trouble, but because I believed if I listened hard enough, I'd find the language to understand what felt unreachable." She paused. "But what I didn't understand then was that even when you're brilliant, if you come from the wrong family, the wrong neighborhood, the wrong color, people won't hand you chalk. They'll hand you a mop." A murmur rippled through the room. "I wasn't just dismissed. I was mocked, undermined. A proof I created was nearly buried. A history I inherited was stolen. And the system that allowed it wasn't broken. It was working exactly as it was designed. The silence grew heavier. I'm not here today to be your exception. I'm not the model minority. I'm not a symbol of resilience. I'm the result of sacrifice, of a mother who scrubbed floors so her daughter could study formulas. Her voice cracked slightly, but she did not break. My story is not rare. What's rare is being believed. One congresswoman dabbed her eyes. Another nodded slowly. I founded Mindset to make sure students like me don't have to wait for the world to catch up to their genius. I'm here today to ask you, what will you do to ensure brilliance isn't wasted just because it doesn't come in the packaging you're used to? She stopped speaking. No one moved for a beat. Then the chairman leaned forward. Thank you, Dr. Blake. That was deeply necessary. As questions began, the air shifted. She answered each with clarity, poise, and defiance when needed. She corrected misconceptions. She dismantled euphemisms. When one senator asked if her success proved that the system wasn't completely broken, Zariah replied with ice in her voice. If I escaped a burning house, would you ask me if the fire department was doing a good job? The chamber fell silent again. By the time the hearing ended, bipartisan murmurs were already forming about a bill, proposed funding for minority STEM mentorship programs, accountability audits for academic institutions, and whistleblower protections for faculty and students of color. News anchors called it the Zariah effect. She stepped out into the sunlight of Capitol Hill to a flood of reporters, but she didn't stop for them. She walked straight to Janice and pulled her into an embrace. Together they stood on the steps, mother and daughter, shadow and sun. Within days, the movement grew. Districts across the country began renaming math clubs in her honor. The Halcyon Institute announced a new Blake Fellowship for first-gen STEM scholars. Social media swelled again, this time not in outrage, but in hope. And then Hollywood called. Her agent, a young woman named Tasha, who had once dropped out of a film program due to racism, took the call. When she met with Zariah the next day, she laid it out plainly. They want your story, she said. A studio, major, award-winning director attached. They say it's time. Zariah looked down at her coffee. My story's not finished. They said that's what makes it perfect. Zariah didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to her laptop. She hadn't yet opened the file. The retired administrator promised. The sealed one. The one they never meant for her to find. She clicked on the attachment. Inside was a scanned letter, a personnel memo dated 2003, from the Dean of Academic Integrity to the Vice Chancellor of Hawthorne. Subject: allegation of academic misconduct. D. Morrow. Attached was a complaint filed by a faculty member, anonymous, claiming Morrow had plagiarized work, submitted by an undergraduate applicant named Amari Blake. The file included a copy of Amari's original submission and internal notes indicating the complaint had been buried in the interest of preserving institutional reputation. Zariah scrolled slowly. There in the margins was a handwritten comment. He's brilliant, but he's nobody. And we don't need another nobody upsetting our legacy. Her hands went cold. Her father had been right. He wasn't just ignored. He was stolen from. Just as Zariah closes the file, her phone buzzes with a new message from an unknown number. They buried more than your father's proof. They buried someone else. Look deeper. The chalkboard was already half covered when Zariah entered the lecture hall. Her students, bright-eyed, hoodie-wearing, latte-carrying, had grown used to arriving early, not to get better seats, but to compete for the chance to contribute to the board before she arrived. Some drew formulas they'd seen online. Others scribbled half-formed ideas. A few, brave enough, left unsolved problems. Zariah never erased them. She walked to the front slowly, her black blazer pressed, her name now etched into the hallway wall outside. Dr. Zariah Blake, Professor of Applied Mathematics. The classroom carried the hum of quiet anticipation. Sunlight filtered in through the tall windows, illuminating every face. Brown, white, disabled, queer, Muslim, neurodivergent, undocumented. Her legacy wasn't a statue. It was this room. Janice sat in the back row, her gray hair pulled back into a bun, a soft smile resting on her face, like light on water. She no longer cleaned buildings. She read in them, volunteered at the local library, wrote poetry no one had seen yet. Her daughter had bought her a house with windows in every direction, and a garden she never thought she'd own. Zariah smiled and greeted the class. All right, she said. Let's build. She began her lecture without notes. As always, she walked through the updated version of her theorem, now expanded with student collaboration, layered with newer concepts from the next generation of thinkers. What had once been a rebellion scribbled in the margins of a discarded book was now a fixture in university curricula around the world. A diagram of her original visual proof translator was now part of standard pedagogy. Textbooks referred to it simply as the Blake loop. Today, they were pushing beyond it. She pointed to one student's attempt on the board, clever but incomplete, and used it to teach recursion, the beautiful art of self-reference in complex systems. But remember, she said gently, we don't solve equations to find answers. We solve to understand why the answer exists in the first place. Laughter, light scribbling, nods. The bell rang, but no one moved until she ended with her ritual. She picked up a piece of chalk, turned back to the board, and wrote in looping script, your origin doesn't define your outcome. Then she stepped aside. Every class ended that way. Every student read it, consciously or not, over and over, until it wrote itself onto their thinking like a proof internalized. The room began to empty, students offering waves and thanks Dr. Blake as they passed. But one student stayed. A girl, maybe 12, small, in a bright red sweatshirt, 2 sizes too big. She had been sitting quietly in the back, scribbling in her notebook instead of a laptop. Zariah had noticed her all semester, always focused, never loud, always last to leave. Today the girl stood slowly and approached the board. Janice watched from her seat, eyes narrowing in recognition. The girl looked at the equations still scattered across the surface. Then, without asking, she reached for the eraser. Zariah didn't stop her. With a swipe, the girl erased the final line of Zariah's theorem. Gasps echoed from the few remaining students. Zariah tilted her head slightly, curious. The girl picked up a piece of chalk and began writing slowly, deliberately. It wasn't disrespect. It was confidence. Like she knew what she was doing and understood the stakes. What she wrote wasn't a correction. It was a continuation. Zariah stepped closer. The room went still. The line she'd written adjusted the theorem's boundary condition, proposing a new structure that expanded the dimensional range of the visual proof translator. It wasn't just impressive. It was something Zariah had never seen before. The girl stepped back, turned to Zariah, and said shyly, it only works when you rotate the matrix 180 degrees and map it against the inverse graph. I tested it last week. Zariah stared at the board, stunned. Then she smiled. What's your name? She asked. The girl blushed. Layla. I'm auditing from the charter middle school. My mom cleans the admin building. Zariah turned to Janice, who had covered her mouth with one hand. History had come full circle, but this time it had been waiting with open arms. Zariah walked over to Layla and knelt slightly to meet her gaze. You know this changes the structure, right? She said gently. Layla nodded. I thought that was the point. Zariah laughed, not out of surprise, but joy. Then she stood, turned to the board, and under Layla's new equation, wrote 2 words, let's explore. The other students clapped softly, inspired but humbled. Legacy didn't mean a story was over. It meant the story had become a platform. After class, as students left and the janitor dimmed the lights, Zariah sat with Janice near the front row. She's just like you were, Janice said, smiling. Except she's got a head start. Zariah nodded. That's the goal. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind of silence filled with echoes of chalk, courage, and memory. Then Zariah pulled out her phone. The sealed folder about her father had led to more than she expected. The original proof stolen by Morrow hadn't just been filed. It had been recommended for publication by another professor. A man who had vanished from the university roster months later, with no explanation. She was still tracing that trail. She had filed a formal request for the university to acknowledge her father's contribution retroactively. The faculty board was still reviewing it, but she no longer needed their permission. Her next book, co-authored with Avery, was already in the works. Unproven, the stories they tried to erase. Her father's chapter was the first. That night, walking across campus, her bag slung over one shoulder, Zariah looked up at the mural that bore her face. She didn't feel pride. She felt responsibility. Her theorem was written in chalk and code. But her legacy? Her legacy was written in the students who would come after her, who would erase her lines not out of defiance, but because they believed they had something new to offer. Because they weren't afraid to start over. As she locks her office door for the night, her phone buzzes with an alert. Layla has just uploaded a proof online that challenges a 100-year-old theorem, and it's gaining traction fast. If this story moved you, share it. Because brilliance doesn't always wear a name tag. Like, subscribe, and help rewrite the way we see potential. Some voices are silenced before they're ever heard. Who's the overlooked genius you've seen in your life? And did the world ever notice them?